chat with you guys. Everybody healthy and well, I hope.
We are. We really appreciate you making yourself available. We know you've got a full plate, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So yeah, let me give you a quick update, and then happy to take your questions. So we have, I guess we've now done 4 bills in the Congress specifically related to COVID. The first was a $8.3 billion bill, which was to put money into vaccine research, treatment research, and included $7 billion in expanded loan authority to the Small Business Association for the economic injury disaster loans. The second bill, which was the Family First Act, was really designed to start to address these specific economic issues caused by specific people who were touched by COVID. So that was the bill that included reimbursement to companies who were needed to provide extended paid sick leave, reimbursement for folks providing short-term disability for people who became sick. Some of the initial expansions in unemployment insurance and Medicaid, that was about a $100 billion bill. Then, of course, we had the huge CARES bill, $2.2 trillion, which was starting to, it's crazy to say 2 trillion as a start, but here we are. But to address the broader economic dislocations, and that included the now famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, PPP program, further expansions on unemployment insurance, money for hospitals to make sure that they get coverage, because so many hospitals, the reimbursement rate for the type of patients they're seeing right now is really low, but they can't prudently take on the elective surgeries and the things that have historically kept their margins up. So programs like that, and of course the $1,200 payment to every American citizen earning $75,000 or less, and plus Social Security recipients and VA, and then some ratchet ups from there. The fourth bill that we passed was the $600 billion, depending on what you call it, CARES 1.5, CARES 5. We're running out of acronyms here. And that was really initially designed because the PPP was such a popular program that it ran out of cash almost immediately, which is insane. $397 billion just right into the economy. And the challenge there, and we were advised by Ben Bernanke very early on that he was sort of counseling us on what he learned from the 2008 recession. And he said that you are always going to feel a tension between deploying the money efficiently and deploying the money quickly. And his advice to us was that when you feel the tension, you're generally well advised to bias in favor of speed, because getting the money out into the economy gets it moving through and starts to pick things up a little bit, as opposed to trying to optimize on the corners. However, there's political blowback if all of a sudden the money's all going to Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and we've certainly seen that with the PPP program. You didn't use that example. I would have been a fortune teller. But with the PPP program, we essentially tried to do a little bit of both, because the PPP program was all administered by the Small Business Authority. The Small Business Authority, by its charter, it still kind of looks like a bank. They do credit checks. The amount you can borrow is a function of how much your business can sustain from a lending perspective. And the PPP program was not designed to only go to credit-worthy businesses. It was designed to make sure that employees were continuing to receive their paychecks while we tried to get through this public health crisis. And so what the PPP said was the amount you can borrow is not a function of credit, it's a function of your payroll. It's targeting small businesses. We initially, intentionally said we wanted to expand it to also cover some of the nonprofit sector, which are also employers. People depend on those, but they don't necessarily fit the definition of a small business. And, per Bernanke's advice, the expanding a program, it's really easy to get the money out quickly. Modifying a program in the name of efficiency has some hiccups. And so there were indeed some delays in the PPP expansion. And what we found in that first round was that the money from that first round tended to go went to a lot of good places, but it tended to go more to larger companies than was intended, didn't do as good a job of getting to people who didn't have existing banking relationships. There were some hiccups on rollout that the Treasury Department was very constructive in addressing, but we had a lot of banks saying, I had to sign 3 forms to approve this loan, and 2 of them are in conflict with each other. My lawyers aren't letting me move forward. What should I do? And so then you wait 24 hours to get guidance from Treasury, and during that 24 hours, more money's out the door, and there's just less in the queue. And I don't say that to make excuses. I think it's that nobody's perfect, and you roll that out. But that second PPP expansion, we tried to address some of those inefficiencies, expanded to include some of the credit unions and CDFIs and other banks in there that could be better target those customers. And we have seen, I think, pretty effectively a increase in the number of loans and a reduction in the average loan size, consistent with trying to make sure that that money gets not just to the 400-person furniture manufacturers, but also to the barbershops and hair salons and people who employ so many folks in this country. The other piece of that bill was another $100 million in funding for the healthcare system, $25 billion for testing, $75 billion to hospitals. There still are some significant issues working through in the healthcare system because the allocation by hospital didn't really follow patient need from COVID. The Health and Human Services took a decision to allocate based on Medicare funding, and if you're a hospital that's in the inner city, which is where most of the COVID cases have been springing up, you probably have a big Medicaid population, not necessarily a Medicare population. If you're someone like Rush Hospital in Chicago, that when they rebuilt Rush Hospital, you remember about 10 years ago, they put in a whole lot of negative pressure rooms because they were concerned about SARS. Well, Rush therefore became a magnet hospital that attracted people that had nothing to do with its historic patient load, but the physical plant. So now they had a goofy allocation. So we're still trying to work through some of those issues, and we'll go from there. As far as what comes next, the only thing that I think I think we can say with some certainty is that we are a long way from getting the public health crisis behind us. And as long as the public health crisis is behind us, you cannot address public health issues independent of economic issues or vice versa. If we open up the economy too quickly and all of a sudden there's a rash of outbreaks, it doesn't matter what the president, what the governor, what your local congressman has to say. If you don't feel comfortable going to a Cubs game, no one's going to tell you to go to a Cubs game. And as long as large numbers of people don't feel comfortable, there's just going to be this slowdown in the economy. And so we're trying to balance that. But as against that, the numbers here really matter. The total U.S. payroll runs about $1 trillion a week. The total U.S. budget last year was $5 trillion. If we're sitting here at persistent, 20% unemployment, there ain't nobody who can shore up the cost of the economy other than the federal government. And the one sort of advantage we have in this moment from the federal perspective is that for the foreseeable future, we are going to have negative or zero interest rates. There's just been this huge flight to quality in sovereign debt markets and in private debt markets, where if you're the borderline junk credit, people are running away from you as fast as they can. On the other hand, if you're the U.S., if you're Germany, if you're GE, people are darn close to willing to pay you to park their money there just so that they know it'll be there when they take it back. And so we at least have the opportunity. And it's funny. Everybody always says you should think of government like a business, and yet I think 90% of the people who say that have never seen a balance sheet, because the government doesn't maintain a balance sheet, and we should have one because it would make it easier to think about the government like a business. But if we can borrow at effectively 0%, and the difference between taking on that debt and not taking on that debt is 5, 6, 7% deltas in the GDP growth on the economy. That's like an equity yield if you think of it that way, right? You should make that investment all day long as you're being prudent about making sure that the things you're doing are equity accretive, if you will. So I think we're at least going to have financial flexibility to do what's necessary for the foreseeable future because of our unique position in the United States. And I guess the last thing I'd say, I've probably talked too long, but the last thing I'd say, and just, my request of everybody and my great gratitude to everybody is that leave all the government aside, leave all our business choices aside. At core, we are in a moment that is asking, what is as individuals, what is the ethical thing that we should be doing right now? And I think if somebody would have told you 6 months ago that, by May we'd be looking at this level of unemployment and this level of shutdown in the economy and all the rest of this, what do you think is going to be the character of the American people? I think people probably would have had a much more dire outlook. That's not to say that there haven't been some nastiness that's come on out there, but in general, people have provided shoulders for other people to lean on. People have tightened their belts. I went to deliver groceries to a food pantry in Wheaton over at the PRC, and there were more cars dropping off than there were picking up, and there were a lot of cars picking up. And there's just a fundamental decency of human character, and I think the question for all of us in our private life and in our businesses is when every household is essentially being asked to spend down their cash reserves, when every government is accumulating deficits or spending down their own reserves, when all the small businesses are as well, I think we want to make sure that the big businesses and everybody else is also thinking like, okay, to he who has much, much is expected, right? And I think this is the time for all of us to be decent and ethical. And so far, we're doing a pretty good job of that, but we're not out of the woods yet. So hopefully that's some useful context. And with the time we have left, happy to answer your questions.
That's a great intro. I'm going to sort of pass the mic around to try and avoid stepping on each other. So Trent Warren, one of our advisors. Trent, you want to lob in a question?
Yeah. So thanks again for your time. I had a few questions, but in an effort to kind of save time, I'll just narrow it down to one. And I think one that's on everyone's mind right now is kind of the pension issue and this new idea that Illinois is going to be able to borrow from the federal government on the basis of this COVID crisis we're in to shore up the pension crisis. Is that something that is going to be voted on, or where do you kind of stand on that?
Well, look, to the governor's credit, he came out and said that was not his request, and that request hadn't been vetted through him. So Illinois is not making that request as a state. What I think is worth us thinking through, and I give all credit to Congressman Foster on this because he's been at the front of this for a long time, is that there's basically two causes of the Illinois pension crisis, my view. The first is that, about 15 years ago, recall when Mary Meeker was saying we should all start shorting muni bonds because every state government was saying equity returns are high. We can essentially reclassify our pensions as being solvent if we assume that they'll get an extra, they're not going to get 5% compound returns. They're going to get 7 or 8% compound returns. And all of a sudden we can raid those pension funds. An awful lot of state governments, including Illinois, did that 15 years ago because it's the worst form of politics, right? I'm going to do something that's going to give me benefit during my tenure in office and kick the can down to the road of people who are in office dealing with it later. That's a big contributor to the Illinois pension problem. The second one, which is really the harder to fix, is that the funding allocations that the federal government uses have to pass both the House and the Senate. The House represents people and the Senate represents land. And as a result, if you look at federal funding programs to states, from Medicaid to the highway fund, you name it, there's a huge disproportionality that low population states get way more money per capita than high population states do. And that's why if you look at the states that are net contributors to the federal balance sheet, they're the more populous states. They're Illinois, they're California, they're New York. For every dollar we give to the federal government, Illinois gets about 72 cents back. The average state gets $1.10 back for every dollar. And to put that in perspective, if Illinois just got the same level of Medicaid funding that Indiana gets, we would not have a budget deficit. And there's a tendency to want to blame that all on Springfield, but the reality is there's a huge inequity in that funding, and the inequity comes from the fact that the Senate has always, if you want 51 votes in the Senate, get a lot of rural senators on board and you can get covered. I represent 740,000 people. The entire state of Wyoming only has 520,000 people in it, and they not only get one representative but two senators, and their representatives' vote doesn't count for 5/7 of mine, even though I kind of think it should. And so what I've been leading an effort with Bill Foster is to say that as we go forward in this CARES funding, the coronavirus doesn't infect land; it infects people. And in the first round of CARES funding, because we relied on those Senate formulas, the small states got in some cases almost an order of magnitude more money per capita than Illinois did. And if we want to get serious about this virus, we need to allocate money on a per capita basis because that's where the need is, that's where the virus is. And if we do that in CARES, it'll make it a heck of a lot easier on Illinois. And if we do that going forward, it will largely eliminate Illinois' budget problems. Not because we're asking for a handout. We're just saying we're all American citizens, right? Doesn't matter whether you live in Vermont or Wyoming or Illinois or California. We're all American citizens. Why should we get such disproportional funding from the federal government? Because when we do, it just puts burdens on states like Illinois to make hard decisions that you don't have to make if you live in Kentucky.
Okay, thanks.
Jennifer Taylor, another one of our advisors. Jennifer, are you on?
Yes, I am on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Congressman. My question is, should the global supply chain be compressed to bring more jobs back to the United States of America? Thank you.
So, short term or long term, probably two different answers. I think in the immediate moment, we need to make sure that we're getting all the resources that we need to have wherever they may be. And we live in a globalized world. Lots of supply chains are global and international. And if we decided we were only going to source things where 100% of the manufacturing chain was domestic, we would essentially be taking a decision that a lot of people should die. So in the short term, no. I think in the longer term, there's some interesting conversations going on, and I don't have a right answer to these conversations, but so many of the hiccups we're seeing in the supply chain, from our food system to our PPE system, are the result of the fact that we've spent 3 decades making our corporate structures really, really efficient. In the food chain from farm to table, there's almost no one in the whole value chain who carries more than 36 hours of inventory right now. Well, when all of a sudden people go to the grocery store and start hoarding toilet paper, there's no surge capacity in the system, right? And so what we're seeing is a lot of the hiccups in the food supply are not because the supply end and the demand end are out of balance. It's because within the delivery chain, we simply can't get those surges through the system that are coming through right now. And we've seen a lot of those same issues in other parts of the economy. And I don't know that there's a right answer to that question, and B, I don't know that anybody has the unilateral authority to decide what the right answer is. But I think certainly as we go through this, some of the interesting conversations I've been having with legislators and with business people is, you plan for a rainy day, but when your definition of a rainy day moves from a little drizzle to a hurricane, the things you plan for become a little bit different. At a more local level, Governor Pritzker was saying to me that a part of the reason why the Illinois unemployment system has been so overloaded is because when they designed the portal and all of the software backbone for the unemployment system, they defined a rainy day as 2008. And the unemployment claims now are so much higher than that level that the system just doesn't have the capacity. It's the same problem, right? So what kind of surge capacity are we going to build into our chains? And some of that will have domestic versus international consequences. But I think it's a globalized question. It's going to be made by business owners who don't necessarily have a sole allegiance to one country, right?
So related to unemployment, I think Gina Hornbogen's got a question that's specifically on that topic.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking our time here. One question I had was, what do you recommend businesses do when they have workers that are earning like more towards the minimum wage amount and they don't want to come back because of the unemployment benefits currently?
I'm not sure in the long term. I think the odds that people don't work because employment benefits are so down. I'm not sure that's really going to happen. Unemployment expansion is a temporary piece, and there's so many people unemployed and so much uncertainty right now. We'll work through that. I think the part of the reason why I'm reluctant to say that I think that's a macro level issue is that there's a much larger conversation going on that's been going on for a couple of years around what do you do in a society where productivity growth consistently outstrips GDP growth, right? Which is essentially the world we've been in for a while, which means we're creating wealth faster than we're creating jobs. And at one extreme, which is largely the extreme we've been on. One of my favorite financial commentators on Twitter said the way to make money in our society is to own the robots, because that's sort of the conclusion when productivity growth outstrips GDP growth. At the other extreme, you have communism, right? We just allocate all the wealth pro rata with everybody in society. I don't think either of those extremes is something anybody on this call would certainly be comfortable with. But I think we do have to grapple with that in this conversation around even if you were of the opinion that we should give massive, you still have a question about the dignity of work, right? We all want to feel productive, and in the same way, I don't think anybody on this call, I don't want to try to be a mind reader, but if I said to all of you, you're going to get your salary and you never have to work a day again in your life, and you just sit at home and do whatever you want, it'd be fun for a couple of weeks, right? And then you're going to be bored. You're going to be sitting there saying, what am I going to do with myself? Am I going to start doing charitable work? Do I get involved with my church, my mosque, what have you? What do I do? And there's that dignity of work question that I think ultimately is going to drive where this gets to. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do know that we were sitting before this crisis at a point where wealth inequality was at fairly historic levels. And a lot of the difficulties we're having dealing with this crisis are because of those inequities. There's almost, what are the stats? Almost 50% of Americans have less than $600 in their bank account. Those people can't afford to miss a paycheck. And we need to think about what is as I said at the start, this is an ethical issue in the first instance. What is the ethical way to deal with that? And what do we do? It may get worse, because if we start opening up the economy and employees are saying, I just don't feel safe. I don't want to work. I don't want to work in a room with 15 cubicles in it anymore. I want to work shoulder to shoulder on the shop floor. Well, does that accelerate automation? Might, right? And now we've got to think through this issue again. So these are tough issues. I don't have good answers. I can tell you that a lot of my colleagues spend a lot of time thinking about it, and thinking about, is this a question for government to address? Is this a question for the private sector to address? What's the balance? Tricky, but we all got to think about it together.
So I'm looking at the clock, Congressman, and we've got a couple of minutes, so I want to be sensitive to your time and get you on to your next meeting. So I'd like to conclude with asking you to share with us 2 or 3 examples of instances where you've just been really, really pleased with behavior or actions or recommendations from the other side of the aisle. So legit pats on the back for the other side of the government. I think in general the country. Well, I'll speak for myself. I get frustrated with not seeing credit given where credit is due, and it seems Democrats will always disagree with whatever Republicans say, and vice versa. So I'd love to hear some specific examples of where you've been really proud of somebody from the other side of the aisle.
Well, let me try to reframe that and just kick a different question to you, because I still at heart I'm still a CEO at heart, right? I spent 16 years building and running companies, and before that, a number of years as an engineer and a scientist. And I got a lot of friends on both sides of the aisle. Brian Stile and I hit it off when we first became freshmen. He took Paul Ryan's seat. He came out of the private equity world, and I spent enough time raising private equity that we hit it off together. Denver Riggleman and I have become good friends. Who's just a hilariously funny, scary, smart guy, former NSA contractor, whip smart. French Hill from Arkansas, really solid on banking issues. All these people are on the Financial Services Committee because you get to know the people who you're on committees with, and I like them a lot. But having said that, I think that there's a real danger in viewing government through a two-party lens, because in no other job, like if I was doing year-end reviews in my last job, and I said to somebody, you've really not performed this year. You've been a dud. Your work product is terrible. You've not met any of the goals that you met. And they said, yeah, but I'm really effective at working with people who disagree with my views on whether a woman should have the right to choose about, whether she has an abortion or not. Like, you'd sit there and say, that has nothing to do with the current conversation, right? Or the right to bear arms. Pick your issue, right? And the reason I push back a little bit on it is that I think if we believe, as I suspect that we all do from your question, Mark, that you should work with people, you should be effective with people who share your values. You should find ways to work together. Find the areas of commonality, work together on those. Don't overemphasize your differences, because that's the way we all do it in every other line of work. The corollary to that is, in the same way, I'm sorry, just one second. Sean Casten. That's the next call I got to get on, so this will put me on the call here. The corollary to that is that in the same way that you shouldn't judge someone negatively because of the party they belong to, you shouldn't assume that just because you have a mix of people from different parties, you're doing something good, because bipartisanship is not a synonym for good policy, not an antonym, right? But the first question is, do you find people who you can focus on good policy? And a part of the reason I push on that is that Denver Riggleman, who I like a lot, and I said to him, you're a super smart guy. Your political party is really off the reservation on climate change, and you're smart enough to know it. The science here is totally settled. It has been for about 120 years. I have tremendous respect for the leaders in the Reagan and George W. Bush White House. Bill Riley is a close friend who was the leader of the Montreal Protocol, came up with the idea of cap and trade as a market-based solution to environmental problems. These were all Republican ideas. And they've now been demonized, and, can we work together? And Denver said, the problem is if I come out really strong on this, I'll get primaried and you won't like the guy who replaces me. And that to me is troubling, because I'm sitting there saying, okay, you just answered with a question that, and I like Denver a lot, but the answer to the question was, I don't think I can lead, right? And so on a policy issue that matters, what he was essentially saying was, don't count on anybody from my party to engage on that policy issue. And that's unfortunate, but if I'm sitting there and saying, a team together of the brightest, don't start by saying I got to have equal numbers of both parties. Start by saying who are the smartest people, and pick from them whoever they are without consideration of parties. And if that ends up over biased towards one side, that's an unfortunate statement, but you can't pretend it's not true. And with that, I got to hop, as this call has come. Thank you so much for doing this. Really a pleasure chatting with all of you. And all, please stay safe and stay healthy.
And to you, Congressman, thank you very much.